Hello everyone. In a prior recording, I was discussing the possibility of a Zen 3 Big Navi and Ampere shortage. In that particular recording, I continued the discussion not just with the shortage, but also how much it's going to cost for a 1080p build. I did that because it's entirely possible for Xbox users now with the increased costs to just move to a 1080p build and completely go computer and never go back to Xbox. Along the way with the discussions, I was talking about how current PC parts on the shelf can be used, assuming that there will be a shortage. That's the recap, so let's just get right into a 1440p build after I make sure you understand one thing. When it comes to 1080p versus 1440p, the monitor size does matter. For 1080p, the sweet spot is 21 to 24 inches. For 1440p, that's 27 inches. So you do want a monitor in those sizes depending on what you're doing. In this case, we're 1440p, so that would be 27 inch. Moving on. The motherboard situation is pretty straightforward. There's only two good motherboards under $200 for X570. And yes, we are doing Ryzen builds for both. That's just because of the way things are right now. But for your X570 options, we have the Prime X570P or the Tough Gaming X570 Plus. The difference between these two is really just features and slight increases to performance on audio and your networking. If you want that performance increase on those two fronts, then you can go the Tough Gaming. Although I don't see it as important, but you can still go for it if you want to. So either or is fine on this front. There is a reason we are going X570p, and we'll discuss it when we get to the video card. But let's go ahead and go to the other parts. As mentioned in my prior recording, I have noticed the 3600X being cheaper than the 3600 for whatever reason. So if you do see that happening, you can go the 3600X. Just be aware that it takes more wattage than the 3600. The difference between these two is 5% performance. Given that we are doing a 1440p build, it is entirely okay to do a 3700X if you want to, due to the fact that we're dealing with higher resolutions and higher performing parts. So you can totally do that if you want to, even if you're just a pure gamer. It will probably be overkill as a pure gamer, but as a streamer, it would definitely be worth it to go 3700X versus the 3600. So keep that all in mind. Related to the CPU discussions here, I do want to bring up the coolers that are included with the AMD processors. This is an older article, as you can see with the 2600X being mentioned. 3rd gen Ryzen is cooler than Intel, so you can expect even lower temperatures than this more than likely. But either way, it goes to show that the cooler that's included with the processors are very good. I do not see a point in spending $25 to $40 for a brand name air cooler. It will be perfectly fine with what you have, assuming that you get a case with good airflow. With that mentioned, I will not be doing a recommendation for an air cooler. If you do go liquid, then I would say you would be looking at a Cooler Master Master Liquid Light 120L, I believe it is the model name for it. I can always double check a bit later, but even then, I don't think it's really worth going out that far. So, short version, we're not going to be doing anything other than what's built into it. Moving on to the SSD situation, I did mention that the Blue SN550 or the Crucial MX500 are perfectly good options for SSDs. It all depends on the prices in your country as to what would be more worth it. The SN550 is considered the fastest SSD for its cost. it's very difficult to find an SSD any faster than that without putting too much money into it. So you can see this time around, I'm not concerned about costs or trying to squeak into a budget. So I'm going straight to a 1TB SN550 as one of my potential options for this. You can see right now it's sitting at 105, which is very low. The Crucial MX500 is not that much different right now. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, as you can see, it's all the way up at 115 for the M2 variant of it. I'm sure you probably could find the 2.5-inch variant for less than that, because you can see it's 110, so it's a $5 difference, but I'm sure in some markets it's even lower than that. The one problem with doing a 2.5-inch is it's going to take more cable management. Because with a M2, you just slide into the motherboard and it's fine. Of course, it has its own hassle as well. It has a very tiny screw, and only a handful of screws can be small enough to handle that. In my old PC building kit, I only have one screw out of 20 that actually works with the small screws on the M2s. So with that in mind, it's perfectly fine to do a Crucial MX500 2.5-inch variant if that's what you want to do. But either way, yeah, that's what I'm looking at, is one of those two. Okay, next let's talk about the RAM. This is something I completely forgot to do in the prior recording, but I quickly corrected that mistake by just simply putting the costs into the description. This time around, I'm doing it much better though. Okay, so when it comes to RAM and Ryzen, you have to understand that there is optimal RAM speeds and other factors involved when it comes to Ryzen. This is something that a lot of PC builders and even PC companies tend to get wrong. For AMD Ryzen, if you're doing dual channel RAM, you want to be using 3600 MHz CL16 or quicker. CL16 is a completely different discussion than megahertz, but just be aware that CL16 or faster is what you want, and 3600 MHz if you're doing dual channel. If you're doing quad channel, the optimal is CL16 and 2933 MHz. Knowing that 2933 MHz is not exactly common, normally I would just go up to 3000, as that's a little bit more common. There's a very good reason I want to work with quad channel over dual channel. It's because on average, quad channel is 20 FPS gain over dual channel. Given that we are working with a 1440p build, I do want to make sure it's as optimal as possible. In the 1080p build, I wasn't worried about being optimal because 1080p is pretty easy to do, but 1440p is where we start really having to worry about the FPS. So with that in mind, we do want quad channel. There's a couple of options here already. I see a Corsair Vengeance both in 2933 and 3000, so that's awesome. There's also a G.Skill Ripjaws, as well as more expensive options such as the Flare, Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro. So I guess if you want RGB, then I would go up to the Corsair Vengeance RGB, but if you're not worried about that, either the G.Skill Ripjaw or the Corsair Vengeance that you're seeing here is perfectly fine. Okay, now we can get into a big discussion about the video card. I've done some more reading into these video cards since I last did builds with them. There has been some updates such as revisions and also the 5700 XT getting more performance out of PCI Express 4.0. That's why I was doing an X570 motherboard. So the PCI Express 4.0 is apparently giving it a 5 FPS increase in performance, which isn't that much, but considering that we want to be ready for future 1440p upgrades, it's just better to have an X570 for not just PCI Express 4.0, but all the other features that are included. So also in the update, I did notice that the Gigabyte gaming overclock is considered better than the Pulse now. The Pulse used to be the best video card to get, but it looks like the more recent reviews indicate that the Gigabyte gaming overclock is what you want. I have noticed that the Gigabyte version of the 5700 XT has ran into less problems than the Pulse, just based on forums and other things. So you do want the Gigabyte gaming overclock for not just the being the best 5700 XT now, but also to avoid as many problems as possible. You will notice it looks like this on the box once my thing decides to go back. There we go. So it looks like this. It's going to come in this boxing. This is the revision 1, as mentioned. Revision 2 is also available. But either way, that's what we're looking for. Given that we are dealing with a bigger overall system in terms of performance and power and things like that, we are going to go up to 750 watts this time. In the 1080p build, I was looking at 650 because I didn't really see a need to go any further because it's 1080p build, and honestly that's what most people use anyways. 1440p hasn't really picked up steam, so this is another reason why I tend to avoid 1440p. It's just too costly, and there's not really much there for it in terms of like performance and support, things like that. But moving on. So I can already see that we have a couple options at 750. We have the Corsair CX750M, which is a highly reputable power supply, but it's bronze rating. When it comes to power supplies, there's different ratings. You can read all about it. It's 80 plus bronze, silver, gold, and then it goes up the list. So I'm seeing two golds right here, the Earth Watts and the Neo Echo. I haven't seen as many reviews for the Neo Echo as I have the Earth Watts. So given that there's currently not much of a price difference between the two, a factor of maybe $4, I would just say go Antec Earth Watts. It's a gold rated power supply, and it has good reviews out there. So yeah, I would just go with that. As for cases, this is where things get interesting. Because I am using an ATX in this motherboard in this particular build, and not a micro like I was with the 1080p, that means I have to find a case that's ATX compatible, and unfortunately there's not too many compact or small ATX cases out there. The Silverstone PS11BW is as small as I can go outside of the CR1088 from Riotoro. Normally I would say just build with a Riotoro CR1088 as it is the smallest ATX case that I can find, but it's unfortunately hard to come by. Not only is it small, but it comes with a really interesting design in that the motherboard, as you can see from this picture, is rotated. It's rotated in such a way that allows the video card to point straight at the roof, which kind of is a cool feature, and I'm not really sure if it makes a big difference in cooling. But another thing too that I kind of like in addition to this is the fact that it has its power supply on or in its own compartment, I should say, because it's on the other side here. It comes in through the other side of the case. So that's features I like, but unfortunately, like I said, the CR1088 is not easy to come by. So the Silverstone is the next smallest that I'm aware of. And with that, it is a little bit easier to come by internationally. So let's go ahead and talk about the differences, because there's a BW model and a BQ model. The BQ model does not have the side window that you see here, and it doesn't have the mesh front. The BQ has a bunch of foam to reduce the amount of noise it makes. The BW does not, and quite clearly it doesn't care about noise because of the front mesh. So for that reason, I would say I would use a Silverstone PS11BW at this time for this particular build, assuming that the CR1088 is not available. There are reviews on this particular case. I scrolled past it, but there's one here from Kit Guru. There's some other ones. This actually has a pretty good picture showing that foam that I was talking about earlier that reduced the noise. That's the Q model. But remember, we're doing BW model. And see, here's QW model showing what it looks like. This is the BW model. So yeah, stick with BW is the short version. But there you have it. There's an entire 1440p build. If there's a shortage in the upcoming hardware and you need a new computer now and can't wait till 2021, then this is what I would do. Same goes with a 1080p build. If there's a shortage, just use that or this 1440p build, depending on whatever you need. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.